People ask me what it was like. I tell them cold. Tomb World is always cold, even when the sky above it is the color of a wound. The stone there drinks heat out of you. It has been doing it for 10,000 years, and it is very good at it by now. I am not force sensitive. Shh. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. Because the way the historians write it up, you would think the whole mission was about Radek and Nova. And they matter. They matter enormously. I want to make sure I say that clearly, before I talk about anything else. What Radek did in that open space above Coruscant, what Nova did in the chamber afterward, the choices they both made. Those things matter, and they were not easy, and they cost real things. I am not diminishing any of it. The Jedi have a way of drawing all the narrative gravity in any situation they are part of, and they usually deserve it. And Radek and Nova deserve it here. I am asking you to hold alongside that the fact that the ship needed to be flown, the calculations needed to be run, the trick that got us out of the Vetheri passage needed to have been invented 12 years before it was needed, and kept sharp, and deployed in the exact second it was useful. But someone flew the ship. Someone ran the calculations, while a Jedi Knight and his Padawan were inside a hole in the ground on Korriban, pulling a map out of a dead man's tomb. Someone kept the engines warm and the scanners hot, and did not, for the record, go inside the tomb himself, because he had been inside once before, on a different job, and once is enough for any man with working instincts. First time I was on Korriban, I was 26 years old, and I was not there by choice. I was flying cargo for a man whose name I will not use, who had a contract with a collector of what he called historical artifacts, and what any court in the settled systems would have called grave robbery, with aggravating circumstances. We went in. The man I worked for went into the first tomb in the valley, and I sat on the ship and watched the sky and listened to the world. What I mean by listened is that I paid attention to my instruments and my instincts the way a pilot always does, and both of them told me the same thing. This place is aware of you. This place has patience. This place is not hostile the way a predator is hostile, because a predator needs you to be worth the effort. This place would wait for something much larger than you without any sense of impatience at all. The man came back out. He had what he came for. We left. I have never asked to go back. And I have turned down 3 separate contracts since that involved Korriban, at prices that would have kept me comfortable for a year. There are places that charge you something you cannot name when you visit them, and the cost does not show up on any ledger you can read. And you know that you have paid it only because you feel slightly less whole afterward than you did before. Korriban is that kind of place. When Radek told me that was where we were going, I did not tell him any of this. It would not have changed his answer, and it would not have changed mine. Some information is just weight. My name is Ozzy. I flew them in, I flew them out. And when the Galactic Council sat in their chamber on Coruscant 3 weeks later and watched the recording of what happened in that approach lane above the planet, the room went so quiet, you could have heard a robe hem touch the floor. I am told the Council does not go quiet. I am told they are an institution built on the principle that someone always has a procedure for something, that there is always a protocol, a precedent, a committee formed to discuss the matter and report back by the end of the 3rd session. When they went quiet watching that recording, the man who told me about it, a clerk, a young man named Devith, who had served the council for 11 years and had never seen the chamber fall silent in his entire tenure, said he felt the air change. He said it was like the room remembered something it had been trying to forget. That was us, 3 people in a dented freighter, who had gone to the worst place in the settled galaxy, because no one else would. Let me start at the beginning, or close enough to it. Radek came to me on a station called Jethir's Crossing, which is the kind of place that exists between systems. The kind of place that is on no official chart, but is on every smuggler's chart. The kind of place where the lights flicker, not because the power is bad, but because the station management has decided that dim lighting discourages questions. He was not wearing his formal order robes when he walked into the cantina, where I was losing money at a card table. He was wearing a merchant's coat, gray-brown, unremarkable, and he looked tired in the way that men look tired, when the tiredness is not from lack of sleep but from something heavier. The kind of tired you get from carrying a purpose that no one else has agreed to carry yet. He sat down across from me without asking. Nova was behind him, slight and watchful, 22 years old maybe, with a stillness about her that the Force-gifted ones develop when they have been trained carefully. She stood near the wall and watched the room the way a good pilot watches his instruments. Without staring at any one thing, catching everything. Eyes moved in a pattern I recognized from soldiers and from other pilots. The sweep and hold, the constant triangulation of exits, of threats, of the space between herself and the nearest door. She was young, but she had already learned that a room is always a problem waiting to be solved. Said, I have a job, it pays well. It requires a man who can fly anything and ask nothing. I said, the asking nothing part is going to cost you more than the flying. He said, fair. And he told me where we were going. I have made a study of bad ideas in my career. I have flown for people who wanted me to bring cargo through blockades, through ion storms, through systems with 3 competing factions, each shooting at anything that moved. I have developed over 20 years a working taxonomy of bad ideas sorted by category and subcategory, rated by survivability and by the specific flavor of dread they produce. Korriban sat at the top of its own category, which I had labeled simply, the places where the dead are still angry. It shared that category with 2 other locations, both of which I had visited exactly once and had no intention of revisiting. Korriban was the oldest of the 3, and, by every account from every pilot and scholar and Force practitioner who had ever set foot there and come back to discuss it, the angriest. I said yes because the number Radek quoted was real. Not an opening, not a negotiating position, but a final number stated once quietly, with no attempt at persuasion, which is the number of a man who knows the value of what he is asking and is not interested in theater. And I said yes because there was something in the way he sat across from me that told me he had already calculated the cost and accepted it. Men who have done that accounting are the only kind worth working for. Every other kind panics at the wrong moment, makes the wrong decision under pressure, and takes you down with them. Radek had the look of a man who had already paid, in some internal ledger, everything this was going to cost and was sitting there because the accounting was done, and it was time to move. We left that night. The approach to Korriban takes you through a system that the official charts still mark as uninhabited and uncharted, which is technically accurate and practically useless, because the system is full of debris from something that happened there a very long time ago. And the debris is not mapped, and the navigating of it requires either very good reflexes or very good sensors, preferably both. I have both. I have spent 20 years cultivating both, because in my line of work your reflexes and your sensors are the difference between a good story and a body that someone else has to explain. Korriban itself, when you break through that debris field and see it for the first time, does something to you. It is a physical thing, the seeing of it. The planet is red, not the orange red of iron-rich dust, but a deeper red, almost brown, the red of old blood dried on stone, and the valleys between the ridges are so deep they look black from orbit. There is an atmosphere, thin, breathable if you have to, unpleasant in ways that go beyond chemistry. Pilots who have been there describe the atmosphere as heavy. That is not a scientific description. It is an accurate one. I kept the engines at idle on landing. Radek told me I could shut them down and conserve fuel. I said I preferred not to. He looked at me for a moment, the look of a man recalibrating, not in displeasure but in acknowledgement, and then said, "Good instinct." And he went into the tomb with Nova. I sat in the cockpit for 4 hours and 17 minutes. I know the exact time because I logged it, which is a habit of mine regardless of what I am doing. Pilots log everything. If something goes wrong, the log is what the investigators read. If nothing goes wrong, the log is what you read when you are old and trying to remember how you survived certain things. And it keeps you honest about the details, which memory consistently refuses to be. During those 4 hours, my sensors picked up 3 things of note. First, an atmospheric disturbance on the far ridge, consistent with a ship entering the atmosphere under low-power approach. Someone else landing. Someone who did not want to be seen landing. Which in my experience means either a smuggler who is trying to avoid port fees, or a threat. The ridge was 3 kilometers from our position, which is far enough to watch from, and close enough to close quickly if closing was the intention. Second, a shift in the ambient temperature around the tomb entrance. It got colder. Not dramatically. My external sensors showed a drop of about 4 degrees over 20 minutes, which could have been atmospheric, which could have been a dozen things. But I had been sitting there for 2 hours by that point, and I had a feel for the ambient, and the drop was not atmospheric. Something inside the tomb was drawing heat, or producing cold, or doing something else entirely, that the sensor was translating as temperature, because temperature was the closest category available. Third, Nova's voice on the comm, flat and controlled, saying, "Ozzy, spool the engines. We're coming out hot." I had the engines at full spool before she finished the sentence. That is not reflexes. That is 20 years of knowing when a calm voice is the most dangerous kind. They came out of the tomb entrance at a run. Radek first. Nova half a step behind, carrying something between them. Not sharing it. Each of them moving with the particular urgency of people who are not running from something directly behind them, but are aware that what is behind them is not going to stop. Radek had the map under one arm. A physical object, wrapped in cloth, small enough to hold in one hand but carried with both. Nova was watching behind them. Her hand was at her side, not on her saber hilt, but near it. That near but not yet is a posture I had learned to read in the years I flew for people who operated at the edges of what the law covered, and it meant, I may need this in the next 30 seconds, but I have not decided yet. They boarded. The ramp came up. I had us off the surface before Radek had cleared the cargo bay, and before I had any idea what was actually in the cloth wrapping, which did not matter yet, because what mattered was altitude and distance. Behind us, on the far ridge, the profile of another ship appeared on my rear sensors. Smaller than mine, fast lines. It was not moving, it was watching. Nova came forward and strapped into the co-pilot seat. Radek stayed in the bay with the map. I could hear him through the partition, breathing slowly and deliberately. The measured rhythm of a man using a specific technique to regulate something that needed regulating. The Jedi do that. They have practices for bringing themselves back to the center when the center has been disturbed. I have my own version of it, which is checking instrument panels in a specific order, and it serves the same function. I said to Nova, "Who is on that ship?" She said, "The Acolyte." I had heard the word before, in the way you hear rumors at stations like Jethir's Crossing, passed between people who trade in difficult information. Not a name but a designation, a figure. An agent of something old and dark that the Jedi Order had classified formally as an extreme threat, and about which the Galactic Council had issued 3 separate public statements of concern, and had done, by the accounts I had gathered, very little of practical consequence. The Council was structured for deliberation. The Acolyte was structured for outcomes. Those two organizational philosophies do not interact well. Nova said, "The map we found tells us where the book is. Book is what the Acolyte needs. If we get the map to the Council before the Acolyte catches us, the Council can get to the book first." I said, "What does the Council do with it?" She paused. She said, "They contain it." I said, "And if we don't get there first?" She looked out the viewport at the reddish atmosphere of Korriban, dropping away below us. The valley-black shadows, the deep-wound red of the ridges, the whole world receding into the distance, with the unhurried patience of something that knows it will still be there when everything else is gone, she said. Then the Acolyte unlocks something that the galaxy has not seen in 10,000 years. And the Council stops being the Council, starts being a problem, and starts being a problem that someone else will have to solve in about 200 years, when the damage is complete. I set the jump coordinates for Coruscant and pushed us into hyperspace. The jump to Coruscant from Korriban is not a short one. You cannot go direct. The gravitational lanes in that region force you through 2 interim drops, 2 re-entries into real space, 2 windows of vulnerability, during which a fast ship that knows your route can catch you and do something about it. The Acolyte, I was beginning to understand, was the kind of threat that always knew the route. We came out of the first jump into a system called the Vethari Passage, which is nothing. A brown dwarf star burning its last reserves, some rubble that was probably a planet, before something catastrophic happened to it a long time ago. No stations, no traffic, No one to hear anything that happened there. It exists on the charts as a navigation reference point, a place you pass through on your way to somewhere that matters. We were supposed to be there for 40 seconds, enough time for the Navy computer to lock the second jump coordinates, and then gone. We were in the Vithari passage for 11 minutes. The Acolyte ship dropped out of hyperspace 9 seconds after we did. I want to be precise about this because the precision is the point. 9 seconds. On a different approach vector than the one we had taken from Korriban, which meant the Acolyte had not followed us through hyperspace. You cannot track a hyperspace jump in real time with standard technology. The physics do not support it. The Acolyte had calculated where we were going and arrived ahead of us, or very nearly ahead of us, using a route I did not know existed. That is either the product of a Navi computer significantly more sophisticated than anything I had heard of, or of a relationship with the Force that allows it to be used for predictive navigation in ways that the Jedi Order does not formally teach. Given everything I've since learned, I believe it was the second. Radek came to the cockpit then. He had the wrapped map in his hands, and his expression had settled into that deliberate architecture of calm that I had recognized at the card table in Jether's Crossing. The look of a man building steadiness out of the available material. Because steadiness is what the situation requires, and he is going to provide it regardless of the internal cost. He looked at the Acolyte's ship on the scanner display. He looked at it for a long moment, reading something in the way it was positioned that I could not read. Something that the Force tells you about a threat that sensors cannot. We need to talk, I said. We need to jump. Talking can happen in hyperspace, he said. The Acolyte will follow us into the second jump if we run now. The Acolyte is reading our intention. Running confirms the destination, I said. Then what you suggest, he said. I go out there. I hold the Acolyte's attention. I buy you time to get to the second jump coordinates. Nova gets the map to Coruscant. Nova said, from behind us, in a voice that I had not heard from her before. Not flat and controlled, not the trained steadiness she had maintained since Korriban, but something with a hard edge in it. The edge of someone who has thought about this possibility and has a response prepared. No. Radek turned to her. There was between them, in that moment, the weight of the particular bond between a teacher and a student who have been through something real together. The bond that is not simply affection, though there is affection in it, but something more like the recognition of mutual debt. I have shaped what you are and you have shaped what I became by shaping you. And neither of us can go back to before that was true. And that means we argue about things like this. He said, Nova, she said, no, there is another way. Give me 60 seconds. I said, I'm open to another way, but 60 seconds is not 60 seconds when the Acolyte light is 9 seconds behind us and closing to weapons range. She said, the second jump, can you mask our exit point? Make it read to an external observer like we're heading to the inner core when we're actually heading wide. I said, maybe. It depends on the quality of the Acolyte's external sensors during hyperspace entry. If they're reading field harmonics at the point of entry, they'll know, she said. They're not. Not in the way that matters. The Force tells you intent, not field harmonics. If you can commit to the false destination, not deceive the Acolyte, but genuinely commit, make the Navi computer believe it for long enough that your own intention is sincere, and only the override knows the truth. I sat with that for a moment. It was the strangest operational concept I had been handed in 20 years of flying, and I had been handed some strange ones. You convince your own ship that you're going somewhere you're not. You create a genuine intention, not a false signal but a real one, and then you override it at the last moment at the mechanical level, at a level below intention. That's insane. And she said, yes. Can you do it? I said, yes. I am not going to explain the technical method in detail. The short version is this. There is a way to pre-program a hyperspace jump override that runs entirely in the Navi computer's hardware layer. Below the software that a pilot normally interacts with, below the level that intention touches. You set the true coordinates in that layer, lock them with a mechanical key sequence, and then program the software layer with the false destination and fly toward it with complete sincerity. The ship believes you, you believe yourself, the entry vector is genuine, and at the last fraction of a second, before the jump field collapses around you, and commits you to a course, the hardware override fires and substitutes the true coordinates. The ship protests afterward. The Navy computer logs a cascade of errors that you have to go through manually and delete before any system inspection that actually matters. The technique is legal in approximately 4 jurisdictions that I know of, and only barely in those. I developed it 12 years ago in a situation that I have described to exactly 3 people in my life, and will not describe here, because the situation involved a faction that no longer exists, and a cargo that I have been paid very generously to forget. We came out 6 light-years wide of Coruscant, at a cargo relay station called Margam Point, which is the kind of installation that exists on every major commercial lane. Warehouses, fuel, a long-range comm array, a small permanent staff who have long since stopped asking questions about the ships that pass through. The Acolyte came out in the inner core. I know this from later reports. I do not know exactly how long it took the Acolyte to realize the mistake, to identify the false destination, to calculate where we had actually gone, and to correct course. Long enough for what came next. Margam Point had a functioning long-range comm array with a direct channel to the Jedi Council on Coruscant. Nova used it. I listened from the cockpit while she gave the full report. The map, its composition, and what she had read from it, the location it pointed to, the specific nature of what waited at that location, the presence of the Acolyte, the pursuit, the situation as of this moment. She spoke for 11 minutes. She was precise, clear, appropriately urgent, without being dramatic. She structured it the way I imagine she had been trained to structure a mission report. Facts first, implications second, recommended action third, and a clean statement of current status at the end. The response came in 3 minutes later, which is extremely fast for the Galactic Council. The Council deliberates with the thoroughness of an institution that has been deliberating for 25,000 years and has developed very strong habits around the process. 3 minutes meant someone senior was already in the command center and had authority to respond without convening a session. Response. Hold position. We are dispatching support. Radek, listening, said support, not a strike team. I said, is there a difference? He said, a strike team has a clear target and authority to engage it. Support means they want to escort us in and make decisions afterward. It means the senior council wants to see the map before they decide what to do about the Acolyte, he said. And while they're deciding, he said, we wait at Margam Point and hope the Acolyte hasn't recalculated yet. We held position for 9 hours. Radek meditated in the cargo bay, sitting cross-legged on the deck plates with his back to the outer hull, and the map wrapped and beside him, his breathing so measured, and even that it registered on the ship's life sign monitors as almost sleep. Nova sat at the co-pilot station and studied her notes on a datapad. Her memory of what she had seen on the map, translated into writing, organized, annotated, the kind of careful reconstruction that scholars do. She wrote for 6 of the 9 hours, pausing occasionally to look at the ceiling, then returning to the pad. I ran maintenance. I replaced the intake filter on the port side engine, which had been showing a slow reduction in efficiency for 3 weeks, and which I had been meaning to address since before Jethir's crossing. I ran a full hull stress diagnostic and found 2 stress concentrations in the landing strut housing that I flagged for dock repair. I checked the emergency lockers, which is when I found the hard suit that Radek had apparently stored there at some point before we departed, and I noted it without asking about it. Because asking about it would have required a conversation I did not know how to have. The 9 hours at Margam Point were the quietest of the whole operation, which made them in certain ways the hardest. When you are moving, when there is a calculation to make, or a navigation problem to solve, or a threat to respond to, you are inside the problem and the problem fills you up, and there is no space for anything else. Sitting at anchor at a cargo relay station, while the people you are responsible for getting home meditate and study and wait, that is when the space opens up, and the things you have been keeping out start coming in. I thought about the Acolyte's voice on the hypothetical channel, the argument I had not yet heard but knew was coming. I had heard variations of it before, in different contexts, from different kinds of people. The argument that the official version of something is incomplete, That what has been classified or suppressed contains truths that the classifying authority found threatening rather than wrong. Sometimes that argument is correct. Sometimes the suppressed thing is genuinely suppressed because it would genuinely harm people, and the people suppressing it know that and are acting in good faith, and the person making the argument about hidden truths is wrong in a way they cannot see because they are too close to the conviction. The difficult thing about the Acolyte's version of the argument, as I later heard it, was that it was not obviously wrong. That is almost always the mark of a genuinely dangerous idea. Not that it is absurd, but that it is coherent enough to require engagement, that you cannot dismiss it without having the actual argument. And the actual argument takes time and attention and goodwill that the circumstances may not provide. I did not resolve this in the 9 hours at Margam Point. I do not think I have fully resolved it since. I have landed, provisionally, on the position that the Acolyte's conviction was genuine and the Council's response was imperfect, and both of those things can be true at the same time, and that the gap between them is things like the three of us in a dented freighter have to operate, trying to make the best available choice, with the information available, in the time available, with the tools available. That is all any of us ever do. The Force-sensitive ones have additional tools. The rest of us use what we have. The support arrived on hour 9. 2 Jedi Knights in a courier vessel, dispatched by the Council to escort us to Coruscant and ensure the transfer of the map. Professional, capable, calm. They did not have what Radek had. That quality of a man who has counted the specific cost and is still standing. But they were good at their work and they were there, which is the minimum requirement, and is sometimes everything. Problem materialized 4 hours out from Coruscant. The Acolyte had not retreated. The Acolyte had not gone back to Korriban, or to any of the locations that the Council's threat assessment protocols would have predicted as likely fallback points. The Acolyte had calculated, had felt perhaps, through some dark extension of the Force's predictive sensitivity, that we were approaching Coruscant, and had moved to intercept us on the primary approach lane. Not at Margam Point. Not at a quiet navigation waypoint where the action could happen without witnesses. On the approach lane to Coruscant, where the traffic density was high, where the planetary defense grid was watching everything, where every second of what happened next was being recorded and transmitted to the Council's command center in real time. I believe that choice was deliberate. I believe the Acolyte was done operating in the margins. I believe the Vithari passage, and the chase, and the escape. I believe the Acolyte had decided that the time for shadow work was over, and the time for a declaration had come. If you are going to make the Council understand something, you do it where the Council cannot look away. The Acolyte's ship cut across our approach vector without warning, dropping out of a micro-jump with a precision that put it 1,000 meters off our bow and matching our velocity within 3 seconds of emergence. The 2 escort knights raised shields and moved into a flanking formation, one on each side, the standard protective configuration. I dropped power from everything non-essential and concentrated it in the maneuvering thrusters and the drive. The pilot's protocol, which is to prepare to run or to evade, and to stay entirely out of the way of the people who are equipped to do the actual fighting. Nova said, Ozzy, keep us steady. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, keep us on our approach vector to Coruscant. Do not deviate, brake. If I tell you to accelerate, you accelerate. Nothing else, I said. I hear you. The Acolyte's ship deployed no weapons. No targeting locks. No heat signatures from weapon systems. Nothing that the defense grid would classify as a hostile action and respond to. It matched our speed with a precision that was almost elegant. And then a comm channel opened. Audio only, no visual. The choice of someone who understands that what a voice does without a face is different from what a face does. The voice that came through was low and unhurried. The voice of someone who has thought about this conversation for a long time, and is now having it, and is not surprised by how it feels. It said, Knight Radek, Padawan Nova, and the pilot, you have something that belongs to the darkness. The darkness would like it back. Radek opened our end of the channel, he said. The map doesn't belong to the darkness. It belonged to a dead man. Dead men don't own things, the voice said. Interesting theology for a Jedi. The dead maintain all kinds of claims. That's rather the point of what you've found in that tomb. The man whose teachings you're trying to contain has been influencing the galaxy from his grave for 10,000 years. Death didn't diminish him. What makes you think your archive will? Nova said quietly. Off the channel, they won't engage us here. The grid is watching. I said. Also off the channel. So this is a conversation, she said. It's a warning dressed as a conversation. And an offer inside the warning. Watch, she was right. The Acolyte spoke for just over 4 minutes. It was the kind of speech that a person gives when they have been holding it internally for a long time and are now releasing it into the air. And it sounds, when it comes out, exactly as they expected it to sound. Complete, self-consistent, the product of genuine conviction. The substance was this. The book contained truths about the nature of the Force that the Jedi Order had classified as heretical, not because the truths were factually wrong, but because they were threatening to the authority of the Order itself. The Acolyte's mission was not destruction, not conquest, but the recovery of what had been suppressed. The galaxy had been managed, for 10,000 years, on an incomplete understanding of how the Force operated. The book would complete it. The Acolyte was asking us to let that happen. It was not a convincing argument, taken as a whole, but it was a coherent one. That was the part that stayed with me. Jack said, "We'll pass." The Acolyte said, "I thought you might." The ship accelerated away from us, not toward us, away, peeling out of our formation at speed, back into the traffic lane, and then the drive signature faded. And for about 20 seconds there was nothing on my sensors. Then the escort courier, off our starboard side, broadcast an emergency beacon. The Acolyte had not attacked us. While Radek was saying 3 words, the Acolyte had gone around our formation. Around, not through. In a maneuver I could not fully reconstruct from the sensor data, because the sensor data did not account for whatever Force-informed navigation had been used, and had hit the escort ship, which was now venting atmosphere from its port side, and broadcasting an all-hands distress. 2 escort knights were alive. Their ship was going nowhere. Radek said, "Go, push us in." I said, "They need assistance." "If we," he said. The escort knights have suits, they have training, they have the defense grid watching and responding in real time. The grid's rescue protocols are already activating. We cannot help them by staying. We can cost ourselves the lead. Go. Pushed the drive to maximum sublight and turned us toward Coruscant's upper atmosphere. The Acolyte came back for us 40 seconds later. What happened in the next 3 minutes and 41 seconds is in the log. I have reviewed it many times. Not because I find it comfortable to review, but because the log is the honest record, and I do not trust my memory to stay honest about things that were difficult. Memory cleans things up. Memory makes the difficult parts shorter, and the dramatic parts longer, and the ordinary parts disappear entirely. The log does none of that. The log is what happened. What the log shows. The Acolyte's ship came up behind us at a speed that exceeded what my drive could produce, and caught us inside the outermost marker of Coruscant's planetary defense perimeter, inside the perimeter, where the Council's sensors had full resolution and full recording on everything. What the log shows next. Radek went to the cargo ramp. I told him not to. I said on the internal comm, "Radek, whatever you are thinking about doing, do not do it. I have a better angle on this from the cockpit than you do from back there, and what I see is a ship that is faster than ours closing from behind. And what I do not see, how what you are planning to do changes that math," he said. "It changes the math because it changes what the Acolyte is chasing. Keep us on approach." Nova knows what comes next, and the ramp cycled. Nova came forward. She sat in the co-pilot seat, and she did not look at me. She looked at the sensor display, at the Acolyte's ship 300 meters behind us, and the distance between our position and the defense perimeter's inner boundary, and she was doing the same calculation I was doing, and arriving at the same number. She said, "Radek is going to hold the Acolyte's attention long enough for us to get inside the perimeter. Once we're inside the inner boundary, Council forces have jurisdiction and authority to intervene, and the Acolyte cannot continue the engagement without triggering a planetary defense response," I said. "How long to the inner boundary?" she said. 4 minutes and 12 seconds at current velocity," I said. "And Radek?" She was quiet. She looked at the display. She said, "Radek knows the math. What the log shows is this. Radek deployed from the cargo ramp into open space 400 meters above Coruscant's outermost atmospheric layer, using the hard suit from the emergency locker and a grav assist technique that I have since described to exactly one person, the Council's senior military advisor, in a classified debrief. And that person's response was, "Where did a Jedi Knight learn that?" I told him I did not know. The honest answer is, somewhere Radek had been before Nova came into his life. Somewhere that had taught him that knowing how to do unexpected physical things in extreme circumstances was worth the time it took to learn them. Himself between our ship and the Acolyte's ship, in open space, above Coruscant. On the perimeter sensor record that the Council's command center was watching in real time, Nova and I crossed the inner boundary with 16 seconds to spare. Behind us, over 3 minutes and 41 seconds that I will not transcribe in detail, Radek held the Acolyte's attention. The medical report, afterward, was thorough and professionally worded, and listed a specific set of injuries that are consistent with what happens to a human body when it encounters the sustained focused attention of a dark side practitioner in open conditions. Deck walked off the medevac transport under his own power 26 hours later. His recovery took longer than the medical report's projections. He has never, in any of the conversations I have had with him since, described what those 3 minutes and 41 seconds were like. I have not asked. The Council was watching us come in. Shh. Def told me later that full attention had been on our sensor transponder from the moment the escort ship broadcast its distress, and that by the time we broke atmosphere over Coruscant, there were 7 Council members in the command center watching our approach. And not one of them was speaking. They sent a full wing to escort us down, 6 interceptors forming up around our freighter as we descended through Coruscant's cloud layer. The formation they flew was not a combat formation. It was something between an honor guard and a cordon, and it made clear to anything watching from outside the system that the content of our hold was the most important thing currently moving in Coruscant's atmosphere. The landing pad they assigned us was not the public receiving yard in the lower spire. It was the upper council spire, the one where the senior members work. Nova looked at the pad on approach. She said, "They know what the map means, just that we found it. What it means that it exists, that the location is real," I said. "Is that good or bad?" She said it's true. What they do with true is up to them. I set us down. The ramp came down. Nova walked out carrying the map in its cloth wrapping, and the 3 council representatives who met her on the pad. Senior members, people whose names I had encountered from the outside, the way you encounter the names of geological features, stepped back, as a group, half a step when she came down the ramp. I was standing at the top of the ramp. I had a clear sightline to all 3 of them. They stepped back, not afraid. Something more like acknowledgement. The recognition of something that has earned its place in the moment. She carried it like she had earned it. She had. I stayed with the ship. Nova entered the council chamber. Braddock came in on the medevac transport 2 hours later, walked off it, sat on the ramp with me, and we did not speak for a while. Below us, the city was its usual illuminated enormity, the layered glow of a civilization's administrative heart. And somewhere inside the building behind us, the most consequential conversation on Coruscant was being held by people who were not us. Tech said, "The Acolyte will try again," I said. "I know," he said, "the book is what matters. The map is only directions. The Acolyte may already know where the book is. The map may have only been confirmation. We may have done all of this to confirm something that was already known," I said. "Does that change anything?" He looked at the city for a long moment. He said, "It changes what the Council has to do next. They have to move fast, which they are not designed to do. And they have to decide, which they are also not designed to do quickly, whether they contain the book or confront what it represents, whether another 10,000 years of containment is a realistic strategy." I said. "That sounds like a policy problem above my pay grade," he said, with something in his face that was not quite a smile but was the material from which a smile could eventually be made. "Yes, it does." The debrief they gave me lasted 3 hours. The room was designed to make people feel small. High ceiling, soft unfocused light, minimal furniture, the architecture of institutional authority. I answered every question with the log running on my data pad. because the log is honest, and rooms designed to make you feel small are not. And I prefer honest records to institutional comfort. I described the sensor contact on Korriban's ridge. I described the 9-second arrival in the Bathari passage. The navigation technique I had used to mask our exit point. The approach lane intercept. The Acolyte speech. The attack on the escort ship. Radek going out the cargo ramp. The final minutes. The senior administrator handling the debrief said, "The navigation technique. The hyperspace exit mask. That is not a registered piloting protocol." I said, "No. I developed it 12 years ago." He said, "You developed it?" I said, "Yes. In a situation that required a solution that did not exist yet." He wrote something on his datapad. I did not ask what. The Galactic Council dispatched a retrieval team to the book's location 4 days later. 6 senior Jedi. A full science contingent. 2 military support vessels. They did not take me or Nova or Radek. They were correct not to. Our ship and transponders were known. Different crew, different profile, better odds of approaching undetected. The team came back 3 weeks later with the book. The Acolyte had been at the location. There had been a confrontation. The details are classified at a level I do not have access to. And the accounts I have gathered since come from Devith and from a member of the science team who spent 2 hours with me at a table some years later and said nothing that was technically a security breach while conveying everything that mattered. The book was retrieved. The Acolyte was contained, not destroyed, not neutralized in the clean military sense, but contained in a way that the book itself had provided the mechanism for, which the science team found profoundly disturbing, and the senior council members found necessary, and which the Jedi on the team found to be the kind of outcome that is neither victory nor defeat, but is real and true, and will have to be sufficient. The council chamber went quiet again when the retrieval team gave their report. Devith was there. He said it was the same quality of quiet as the first time. The kind of silence that an institution produces when it has encountered something its existing vocabulary cannot account for, and is in the process of deciding what words it will eventually find. The formal record uses the phrase, situation contained, threat neutralized, pending further assessment, ongoing study authorized. The informal record, which does not officially exist but always does, because institutions generate 2 records, the one they can file and the one they have to live with. The informal record says something closer to 3 people in a dented freighter went somewhere no one else would go, held together under conditions that should have ended them, and delivered what the entire apparatus of the Council had failed to secure through 11 years of official threat assessment and committee formation and formal statements of concern. Devith told me that the senior chair, when the sessions resumed after the silence, said, We owe them a debt we do not have the vocabulary for." I have thought about that phrase many times since. It is what institutions sense when they have encountered something that their systems were not designed to account for. The Council's systems account for Jedi Knights, for the vocabulary of force sensitivity, for the disciplines, for the doctrines, for the outputs of the Order's training process. They account for threats like the Acolyte in the abstract, committees, assessments, protocols, formal responses. What they do not have a protocol for is the pilot who is not force-sensitive, who carries no saber, who has never been inside the temple for a day of training, and who made up a hyperspace navigation technique 12 years ago in order to not die, and used it to save a mission that every official protocol had failed to protect. They do not have a vocabulary for is the choice. A Jedi Knight, after everything, going out a cargo ramp in a hard suit in open space, because the math said someone had to, and the math had been done, and there was no one else to do it. Nova found me on the landing pad the morning after the retrieval team returned. She sat on the ramp, and we looked at the city, and she told me what the book had contained, and what the Council intended to do with it, speaking carefully, and within whatever boundaries she had accepted, telling me what she could. She said, "I think they'll do what they're designed to do. They'll study it for a long time, and produce a very thorough report, and form a committee to review the report's conclusions. And that's probably the right outcome," I said. "Probably," she said. "The alternative is that they act fast on something they don't fully understand, and fast action on things you don't understand tends to produce results that take a long time to undo. I said, in the Acolyte? Contained isn't ended, she said. No, contained isn't ended. Whatever dark thing was moving through the Acolyte, whatever philosophy, whatever conviction, it doesn't stop because one person is stopped. It finds another vessel. It has been finding vessels for 10,000 years. The Council has been containing it for 10,000 years, and it keeps coming back. So, what does winning look like? She thought about it for a long moment. She said, I don't know. Maybe winning looks like each time it comes back, the response is a little better, a little faster, a little more honest about what it actually is. Maybe winning is incremental and slow and never looks like winning in the moment. That's not a very satisfying answer. She said, no, but it's the true one. And the true answers are the only kind I trust now. Shh. She said that last part looking at me, and I understood she was returning something I had said to her early in the mission, in a different context. And that returning, it was a kind of acknowledgement. I went back to the maintenance. Port thruster mounting bracket, which needed a dock repair I had been deferring. In the hours on it that afternoon, working in the lower hull with the dock crew that the Council's facilities office had assigned, and I thought about the Acolyte's voice on that comm channel, unhurried and coherent and completely sure of itself, and about the 10,000 years of containment that hadn't contained it, and about the three of us in this dented freighter who had gone to Korriban and come back, and I decided that I did not have a conclusion about any of it that I trusted yet, and that was acceptable, and that not having a conclusion you trust is different from not having done your job. Radek was reassigned to the study team that the Council formed around the book. Nova took a solo assignment that was not briefed to me, which meant it was either important enough to be classified or sensitive enough to require someone who could move quietly alone. And she was the right person for either. Took the ship back to Jethir's Crossing. It is a station between systems. It is on no official chart. The lights flicker. The drinks are cheaper than they should be. The card tables are the kind where you lose money at a predictable rate if you are not cheating, and I am not usually cheating. It is the kind of place where a pilot can sit without being asked what they have seen or where they have been, because everyone in the room has seen things and been places they are not discussing, and the collective agreement is to leave that alone. The story of what we did has gotten around the way those stories do, compressed into rumor and shaped by retelling. In the version that circulates at Jethir's Crossing, there are 12 ships and a space battle that lasts an hour, and the pilot is a retired intelligence operative with 2 decades of covert work behind them. I have heard 3 separate versions in the 2 years since. The truth is quieter. A dented freighter and 3 people, and 4 hours and 17 minutes on the surface of the coldest world I have ever sat on, waiting, while a Jedi Knight and his Padawan went somewhere that most people never come back from. Navigation trick developed in a desperate moment 12 years before, and used once more in a desperate moment. A man going out a cargo ramp in a hard suit because the math said someone had to, and the accounting had been done. That is all of it, stated plainly. I am not force sensitive. I have no special destiny that anyone has identified. I went because the number was real and the man who quoted it had already accepted the cost. And those 2 things have always been enough for me to agree to almost anything. But I will say this much. The Galactic Council, which has been managing the settled galaxy for 25,000 years, which has a form for every contingency, and a procedure for every crisis, and a vocabulary for almost everything it has encountered, that council went quiet. Twice. Watching what 3 people in a dented freighter had done when no one else would do it. They are still studying the book. The threat is contained but not ended. The galaxy is not cleaner or safer than it was, but something moved. The Council has been managing the settled galaxy for 25,000 years, which is long enough to develop strong convictions about what the managed galaxy looks like, and what the things that threaten it look like, and what the appropriate responses to those threats are. One of the things that long institutional experience produces, alongside wisdom, is a kind of pattern recognition that is very good at identifying familiar problems and very slow to recognize the unfamiliar ones. The Acolyte was not an unfamiliar problem. The Council had protocols for Acolytes, had faced versions of this threat before, had classified it and filed it, and monitored it, and issued statements about it. What was unfamiliar was the book's location being confirmed, the map existing as a physical object outside any sanctioned archive, and the retrieval being accomplished not by a sanctioned team operating under Council authority, but by a Jedi Knight who had apparently decided to take the problem seriously without waiting for committee approval. Radek never filed the mission request that he was supposed to file before going to Korriban. There was a form. There is always a form. The form required a preliminary threat assessment, a review by the appropriate division, authorization from a senior member, a safety brief, and a stated operational plan with contingency subplans. The form exists because 25,000 years of doing things without forms produced outcomes that required the creation of forms. Looked at the form, apparently, and at the timeline of what the Acolyte was doing, and where the book was, and how quickly the window of safe retrieval was closing, and decided that the form was going to take longer than the window allowed. He was right. The senior division that would have reviewed his request was in a 3-week deliberation cycle on a different matter when he would have filed. He was also, from the Council's perspective, deeply out of order, which is why the formal record of the mission begins not with Radek's departure from Korriban, but with Nova's long-range comm from Margam Point, at which point the mission had already happened, and the Council was in the position of responding to facts rather than authorizing actions. I think about that sometimes. The gap between the form and the fact. The Council is not wrong to have the form. Peace exists because of real outcomes from real failures of coordination and authorization that produced real harm. The form assumes a pace of events that the universe does not always cooperate with. When the universe moves faster than the form allows, you get Radek at a card table in Jethir's Crossing, finding a pilot who will fly into a situation without asking about the form, because asking about the form would have meant waiting for the form, and waiting for the form would have meant losing the window, and losing the window would have meant the Acolyte got there first. I do not know whether what we did was right in the final accounting. I know that it worked, in the sense that the book was retrieved and the Acolyte was contained, and the Council had time to assess what they had and decide what to do with it. Whether what they decided was right, whether containment is the right strategy, or confrontation, or something else the senior members are still discussing in the rooms I do not have access to. I have no way to evaluate from where I sit. What I can say is this. When Nova walked down that ramp with the map, the 3 Council representatives stepped back, that half step, and Devith, who had been watching the chamber for 11 years and could read the qual of a silence, said, the room went quiet, in a way it did not go quiet for scheduled events or expected outcomes, or the routine management of the galaxy's business. It went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has happened that is true, in a way that exceeds the available vocabulary. When the event is bigger than the form, and the institution knows it, and is standing in the presence of that knowledge, with nothing yet to say. Clock eventually restarts. The procedures resume. The forms get filed retroactively. The classification levels get assigned. The committee forms and meets and produces its report, on schedule, with the appropriate rigor. But there was a moment, 2 moments, actually. One when the approach recording played, and one when the retrieval team reported back. And in those moments, the Galactic Council, the 25,000-year institution, the architects of the managed galaxy, the people with a form for everything, sat in something that had no form yet. Put them there. 3 people in a dented freighter who went somewhere no one else would go. I think about that at the card table sometimes. Losing money at a predictable rate. Watching the door. The motion that Nova described, the acceleration she felt through the force, it continues. Where it goes depends on what the Council decides, and what the Order does with what they found, and whether 10,000 years of the same strategy is enough information to change it. I am at a card table in Jethir's Crossing, losing money at my usual rate, and my ship is fueled and logged and ready. The next job will come the same way this one did. Someone will sit across from me and quote a real number, without embellishment, and I will know from the way they sit that they have already counted the cost. That has always been enough.